Hey everyone, it's Nightharo here, and today we're going to talk about the Endless Archive, specifically staying alive. So the hardest part in the core concept of the Endless Archive is staying alive. That's the hard thing to do. It's not about doing the most DPS and what have you, but you don't have to take my word for it. You can listen to the creative director of ESO, Rich Lambert, say the same thing.
It's not time-based
right,
at
it's
all,
not time-based,
right?
right.
So you don't have to be crazy efficient in this. Like,
yeah.
your focus is on going as deep as you can.
So with that in mind, how do we stay alive? Well, there are basically two main situations. The one is you're going in solo or solo with a companion, and the second one is you're going in with duo. Now, if you're going in duo, what I would recommend is having one tank and one DPS.
Lauren is currently playing a tank, and Rich is playing his best at a DPS.
The tank holds taunt. Make sure they stay alive. They're on a full tanking build, just like you'd use in a dungeon. And there's some modifications and changes, obviously, you could make for the duo content, but that's basically what you're going to go with. And then this other person should be a DPS, right? You need someone to do damage or you're never going to get through the archive. And in that situation, I would strongly recommend that DPS use Ring of the Pale Order. And I mean that even if you're on a heavy attack build. You can use Ring of the Pale Order even with a heavy attack build. There are ways to build for it and what have you. But the idea here is that the Ring of the Pale Order will give you a massive amount of heals, and that will help keep you alive. But with that said, you could still use the Oakensoul Ring. Just realize you're going to be having to cast heals and cast shields a lot more often than if you use Ring of the Pale Order, which is totally fine, but it will slow down your DPS and kind of slow down your progression like through the content. Now, the other situation is going in solo. And again, you have the same choice. But I think for this, the Oakensoul Ring makes a little bit more sense because it increases your damage mitigation and all that kind of stuff. You might find yourself heavy attacking, healing, heavy attack shielding, and that kind of thing as you move through the content. But, slow and steady wins the race. So that's totally fine. Or you could also go with Ring of the Pale Order, which again heals you for the percentage of the damage done. And in that case, that what you're going to want to do is try to make sure you stack enough damage mitigation so you don't die to a one-shot, which will be a less of a concern on an Oakensoul build. So what does that mean? How do we survive? Well, there's basically two situations, two things that are going to kill you. The first is getting one shot, okay? So taking one hit that does so much damage that you die, or you almost die and then something else hits you and you die pretty much instantly. And in that situation, there's two solutions. One is to have a shield or to have more health. The shield basically gives you the effect of more health for a second as you take the blow. And then, of course, higher health just means that if you take the big blow, you might have some health left over so that you can then heal out of it. And then the other situation is that you're taking so much damage from a bunch of little sources that it overwhelms your heals. So the answer to that is more healing. And then, of course, with both of these situations, more damage mitigation will always help because that makes the big hit smaller and it makes all those little hits smaller as well. So damage mitigation kind of always works for all these situations, but you're basically looking at shields versus healing. So if you're in duos, you usually shouldn't be taking big hits for the most part, okay? Because the tank is going to be taking those big hits and they should be able to survive it, or rather will be able to survive it. So that just leaves more healing for you. So my solution to that is to have the DPS in the group run Ring of the Pale Order. Yes, it is reduce the healing because there's somebody else in the group, but it's only one other person. So Ring of the Pale Order, as long as you keep up your damage over time, it'll basically heal you for your full health every second. So as long as you're not getting one shot, it'll keep you alive. And that can be kind of tricky, but it actually ends up being a fun playstyle where you make sure to keep damage on opponents. And when we go into our individual class guides, I've got a ton of information about how to do that and how that can work out. So stay tuned, I guess. Subscribe to check out that video. Now, in the situation that you're solo, that's when Oakensoul makes a little bit more sense because it gives you a whole bunch of damage mitigation abilities that you can get otherwise, but it requires a lot more complex gameplay to be able to do that. So solo, you could also use Ring of the Pale Order, but eventually you're going to get to a point where you're getting like one-shotted. So then it might make sense to go with Oakensoul or to make a tank build that has Ring of the Pale Order on it. The issue, and I have tried this out before, is trying to do like a hybrid tank DPS. It just doesn't quite work as synergistically as the duo kind of content. And this is witnessed by like those who solo dungeons and what have you. Almost always they're using the Oakensoul Ring and not using Ring of the Pale Order. And I think that kind of illustrates how many buffs and everything that can give you. Okay, with all that in mind, let's go ahead and talk about some other things. So we said, surviving those one-shots, that's important. One of the easiest ways to help us do that is just have more health. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to just change our food. So if you were a DPS, what I would strongly recommend for you to do is to run tanking food. And what I mean by that is something that gives you max health, and then generally something that will give you stamina and magicka recovery. Now, if you're on a heavy attack build, you'll be constantly full on magicka, so you won't really have to worry about that as much. And so in that situation, maybe you could run something that just gave you max stats, period. So in that first situation, what I would recommend is running something like Jewels of Misrule, or if you want to go more expensive, Orzaga's Smoked Bear Haunch or Orzaga's Red Frothgar. Both of those recipes for the Orzaga's Smoked Bear Haunch and Orzaga's Frothgar can be found in Rothgar. You can go do the quest to get those recipes. Just as an FYI, I know they're very expensive in the vendor, but you can go get those recipes and then get the materials yourself, and you might end up saving $1. Jewels of Misrule is honestly though like a really good, cheap bargain food that works almost as well. And if you're in the heavy attack situation, you probably already know this, but you're going to use Sugar Skulls since you don't really need the recovery. And then keeping with the same thing, what I would recommend for staying alive is to use Tri-Stat Potions, okay? And so not weapon or spell damage. And the main reason for that is because the Tri-Stat Potions gives us both major intellect and major endurance. Both of those increase our magic and stamina recovery by 30%, and there is no other good place to get that buff in the game, okay? It really is just potions, and Tri-Stat Potions are really the only way you can get that makes sense. Well, and I say that you could actually use Heroism Potions, which will give you more ultimate back, which will not heal you, but it will give you the ulti generation there as well. And honestly, like I guess if you're going really sweaty and you don't need the heal from the potion, that might be the best thing to do. But generally speaking, I would just use Tri-Stat Potions. Now, with that in mind, we do want to find some source of major prophecy or savagery and major brutality / sorcery, depending if we're mag or stam and how we're building. But we'll talk about that when I go into the individual class guides. There are ways of getting that. But the extra recovery, again, the main reason we want this is because with our magicka, we can use that to shield, we can use it to heal, and then with our stamina, we can use it to roll dodge, we can use it to block, maybe we can use it to shield. It just depends what our setup is. But you want to be able to do both those things on all classes and all roles, right? Even if you're stamina, you still want magicka, and even if you're magicka, you still want stamina to be able to do some of those things. And that's what we're most concerned about, because that's what will keep us alive. Now, another thing we can do, no matter what class, what role we're on, is blue CP. We can change our blue CP. So Reaving Blows will heal us for 7% of our direct damage caused. That is more of a thing I would be concerned about on a heavy attack build. If you're using Ring of the Pale Order, you shouldn't need this because you'll be getting healed to full every turn, as long as you're keeping good dots on an opponent. Another one that is not a slottable and is very important is Preparation. It reduces our damage taken from non-player characters by 10%. One of the first things I would definitely grab, and it's really nice that it's not slottable. After that, we have several CP. We got Ironclad, Unassailable, Enduring Resolve, Duelist Rebuff. Basically, all of the normal tanking CP that you might use, you might slot on your DPS. Now, for a DPS, usually each one of your slottable CP is responsible for about 3% of your damage. So just realize that you're trading about 3% damage for about 6% damage mitigation. Now, moving on to red CP. Expert Evasion. This gives you one free roll dodge every 30 seconds. This is an amazing CP, and I strongly recommend it for just about everybody. I usually put this on my bar, and it's so good that even when I don't need it, I usually don't bother taking it off because I know I'll want it on the next fight. That's how good it is. Another one that can be situationally useful is Slippery. It allows you to break free every 21 seconds. It's kind of a weird way to say that. What that means is that if you get stunned or CC'd, you'll automatically break free once every 21 seconds. So if you're dying because you got CC'd and you're not able to heal yourself or do damage or shield, then Slippery might be a good CP to slot. After that, Fortified. Fortified can give us up to a little over 1,700 armor. Armor is both magicka and physical resistance, so just read armor as resistance. This is one of the ways we can get to resistance cap, and we'll talk about that in a second because that's very important. Another one here that could be situationally useful and also could be a trap is Bracing Anchor. Bracing Anchor increases the amount of damage we can block by 20%, but it also slows us whenever we block by 16%. So the main reason we want to slot this is if we are dying to getting heavy attacked and taking one-shots, it might help us survive through that, but there's several other ways with skills and other things that will allow us to do that. So I don't necessarily recommend this, but just realize it's here. It's a bit overused. It can be situationally very good, but it can be a bit overused as well. After that, the red tree again is really a choose your own adventure. So you could do Boundless Vitality for an extra 1,400 health, help us survive those one-shots. Also, some of the heals we're going to be using are going to be tank heals, and tank heals scale off of your max health, so that's another reason we want to kind of build towards more max health. Celerity increases our speed by 10% while in combat. That can always be very helpful. It's just nice being able to move a little bit faster in combat, especially if we need a kite or what have you. And I think that is it for CP. There's something I could say about just about all of these, but we'll leave it there for now. Now, resistances. So resistances, out of all the damage mitigation sources, you'll see seen minor protection 5%, major protection 10%, that kind of thing. Resistances can block up to 50% of the damage that we take. So the resistance cap is around 33,000 resistances. And so building towards that mark is one of the best ways that we can reduce damage. And there are a lot of ways to do that. I've done several videos. I'll link a couple of tank videos down below. They're not going to be the best for this exact purpose, especially if you're like on a DPS, which I'm assuming you are, and you're trying to stack resistances. But just realize that that is a very important thing and something you might want to build for. With that, penetration is also equally important. Penetration is the other side of resistance, right? That's how much damage we're doing to our opponents. So some of the mobs in this endless archive will reduce your damage by like up to 50%. And so the best thing you can do if you're in a situation where you can either add penetration or add some percentage of damage increase or add more damage or whatever, it is basically always better to add more penetration if you were not already at resistance cap. And again, in the endless archive, I think like they went up to like 36,000 or something like that. The resistances went crazy high, like double that of what you would find in a trial, which is normally a veteran trial, which is normally the highest resistances you will find outside of mechanics and what have you. So with that, you want to keep in mind things like light armor will help you with your penetration, making sure you have major and minor breach applied. If you're running duo, your tank should be doing major and minor breach for you. Also sets like Crimson Oath's Rive, Alkosh, Tremor Scale, those are all sets that your tank can use that'll help you increase your penetration. I know I'm being a little bit vague on penetration and resistances, but I've done videos covering all these topics like pretty in depth, particularly resistances, a little bit less so penetration. So with that in mind, let me go ahead and give you some concrete examples or ideas for what you can use. So again, tanks use tank stuff, right? Watch a video, whatever. I've got a quote unquote unkillable build, for tanks or whatever on the channel. I'll link that stuff down below. But for the DPS, so one of the first sets I would recommend if you were just trying to go like maximum tanky, and that's going to be if you're going with crafted easy sets to use fortified brass. Fortified brass just increases our total resistances. Each line of fortified brass is a crafted set from Clockwork, and each set increases our resistances, and the total ends up being like 7,700, which is reducing our damage taken by like 12% if we're not already at resistance caps, which generally we shouldn't be, particularly on a DPS. And what you can do with this set is that you can actually make it in divines and then make it in the weight that you want. And yes, because you're not making it heavy, you will lose about 3,000 resistances just from the armor plus whatever you will get from the heavy armor passives. But at the same time, it'll give us a ton of extra recovery. So if you're on a heavy attack build, you could go with the heavy armor and you would be just fine because you're not that worried about the recovery. You do lose some DPS for not having the DPS passives from the medium and light armor skill lines. But again, we're constantly trading damage done for more damage mitigation. But in general, you can run either light or medium, whatever you want to run on your build, and still get that extra 7,700 resistances, and you can still get to resistance cap with doing this. And then what I would pair that with is Iron Blood. Iron Blood drops from Falkreth Hold, and what this set does is it gives us an extra 3,000 armor just from a couple of pieces of armor on it, and it also gives us major protection, which reduces our damage taken by 10%, major Aegis, which is like the only place to get this, or one of the very few places to get this, the best place to get this. Major Aegis reduces our damage taken by another 10%, and then minor protection, which reduces our damage taken by 5%. Now, minor protection we do get from the Oaken Soul Ring, and there are other sources of it, but those first two 10% damage reductions, there's really not a great place to get those from. So just that one set, and this is a heavy armor set, is going to reduce our damage taken by like almost 30%, okay? So just Iron Blood set in and of itself, if we don't already have all those buffs, going to reduce our damage between 25 and 30%. So a huge damage mitigation benefit from that set. Now let's go ahead and talk about armor weights. So one of the things people don't realize is armor weights, in addition to giving us recovery of that particular stat, either stamina for medium armor or magicka for light armor, is that it also reduces the cost of those skills. And so when you're running solo content or close to solo content like we're going to be here, and you're not on a heavy attack build, you really want to wear the weight of armor that is appropriate for the kind of skills you're casting, okay? So if you're mostly a mag build, you want to generally wear light armor. And in here, it's going to increase our penetration, which is also nice. So solo light armor is actually oftentimes better than medium armor. But if you're running a stand build, you probably still want to run medium armor. Again, deal with your sustain however you want, but in general, that's my advice. And again, it's because not only does it give you recovery, but it also reduces the cost of those skills. So if you're casting a skill every second, which is as fast as you can, they actually give the same benefit. Okay, so it's kind of like double dipping. So just realize that. That's why, even swapping out one piece of medium for light or light for medium can help and kind of change your sustain, because it is really that good. Now, if you do decide to go with these really super tanky Iron Blood set, Fortified Brass, you're still going to need some penetration. And you could go with another tanking set for your monster set, but I would actually recommend something like Balorg. And Balorg, what it does is when you cast your ultimate, not only it gives you a bunch of weapon and spell damage, but it also gives you a bunch of penetration. And as we mentioned, as we move further and further into the Endless Archive, penetration is going to become more and more important. Now, I haven't done a deep dive in exactly which mobs and what level that, penetration becomes that important. Hopefully that information will come out in the near future. I just have an overuse injury, so I can't spend, 12 hours grinding through the archive to find that information right now. But I am sure that we as a community will figure that out soon, and hopefully that information will be out. If someone knows, you can feel free to drop in the comments down below, actually, and I will pin it so everybody can see it. And I'm sure that would be very useful and helpful to the community. So please, if somebody knows, please let me know down in the comments down below. But using something like Balorg will help us in those burst phases to be able to get full penetration, and it's a really good set, especially if we're dropping like a big Destro ult or something like that. Now, also along the lines of penetration and resistances. So there are two Munduses that I would strongly recommend you consider. One is the Lady, which will increase your resistances. I think it's like 4,400 is how much it increases your total resistances, and that can help you get to that 33k cap. Or the Lover. The Lover will increase your penetration by about the same amount. So you can swap these out as needed if you need more survivability versus needing more damage. Oh, also an important note about the 5-piece sets here and swapping these out. So let's say that you're swapping a medium set for another medium set, and they're both all divines, and your Munduses and everything else is the same. Typically, your 5-piece sets provide you between 5 and 10,000 extra damage in a kind of an idealized situation. And you know what? It might be like 6k to 11k, but again, it's somewhere in that range, depending on what sets you're using. So just realize for each set that you're dropping here, you're going to be losing about 5% damage, kind of depending, just so you have an idea of what the trade-off here for survivability is versus losing damage. But that is assuming that you're not putting on heavy armor sets when you were wearing a medium armor or light armor set. So keep that in mind. And you know what? I think that is actually it for kind of the generic stuff. So I have a full spreadsheet here that'll pop up on each one of these classes, kind of going over each skill that you'd want to use, sources of various damage mitigation and all that kind of stuff. But I think that each one of these kind of deserves its own video, so I will try to get those out as quickly as possible. My videos often take a long time because I do a lot of research and I do a lot of stuff behind the scenes, so please be patient with me. If you want to support the channel, if you appreciate what I do, please hit the subscribe button or consider becoming a channel member. Becoming a channel member doesn't really give you any perks, to be totally honest, but it's just a way that you can, if you like what I do, and you can support the channel. I know I always super oversell it. Now, I don't want anybody to become a channel member, and feels like they should be getting something extra. I want to make my videos available to everybody regardless of their ability to pay. So that's why I really don't like paywalls and that kind of stuff. But becoming a channel member is just a way of supporting the channel. So if you like content like this and you want to support it, please consider becoming one. Anyways, that's it for today. I appreciate you guys watching, and we'll catch you in the next one.